Hello, welcome to the program. I'm Lucy Barber in Shepparton in northeast Victoria. Coming up on the rural quarter, late rain is a nightmare for cherry growers.
It's always a little bit disheartening when you've got some beautiful fruit there. Unfortunately, sort of walk out there one morning and sort of find that you've got a percentage of your crop sort of lost.
But first, one of the nation's biggest resources projects is officially underway in Australia's northwest. The $29 billion Wheatstone natural gas project is expected to transform the sleepy town of Onslow into a major resources centre. Ebony Spriggs reports.
This is the first step towards making the multi-billion-dollar Wheatstone project a reality. With the turning of the sod near Onslow, it's all systems go to build a major hub to process gas from off the Pilbara coast.
It actually opens up another chapter in Australia's LNG history, as Wheatstone helps propel Australia to be a world-leading LNG exporter by the year 2020.
The project will create more than 6,000 jobs during construction and pour more than $17 billion into the Australian economy. The Premier says it'll also help boost domestic gas supplies.
This will, when it comes into production, provide more gas for residents, householders and industry in Western Australia.
The project's expected to transform Onslow into WA's next boom town, with the population set to triple over the next 5 years. Chevron and the state government plan to spend more than $250 million on infrastructure to cater for the growth. Among the improvements, upgrades to the airport, a new power station and desalination plant.
We're trying hard, but I don't really think we, appreciate the enormity of this project.
This probably is the best news that Onslow has had in over 100 years. This is a small coastal outback town, and it's now going to be part of a growing LNG industry.
There was one noticeable absence. Traditional owners boycotted the ceremony, saying there are unresolved heritage issues with the site. Chevron says it'll work hard to resolve the dispute.
It's been a year that cattle producers would love to forget, but things are looking up for 2012. As Christy O'Brien reports from Darwin, sweeping new legislations will make Australia the strictest regulator in the world. And a warning, this story does contain some images that viewers may find distressing.
On the 3rd of June, the federal government sent the cattle industry into a spin when it imposed a ban on live exports to Indonesia. It followed a report on the ABC's Four Corners program showing graphic footage of cattle being mistreated in Indonesian abattoirs. The export ban came at a bad time. It was the height of the season, leaving producers millions of dollars out of pocket.
The biggest upset through the year was something that shocked our industry.
In August, the ban was lifted with strict conditions imposed. Ships were again being loaded, and to date, nearly 400,000 head of cattle have been sent to Indonesia. But just as the cattle industry was finding its feet in Central Australia, fires ripped through the region, destroying livestock and infrastructure.
Close to 80,000 square kilometres of Central Australia was burnt out. It's about 60% of Central Australia.
One saving grace has been the record prices fetched for cattle in the last few weeks. 17 abattoirs in Indonesia have met the new standards set by the federal government. Those strict conditions will apply to all Australia's export countries by the end of 2012. But the export ban gave the industry a scare, and producers are now looking at other markets, like the proposed $40 million abattoir near Darwin. It could process 1,000 cattle a day. Infrastructure upgrades are needed for it to go ahead, but the government is yet to come to the table. And for those wanting to get out of the pastoral industry, property prices are grim. Not one of the 20 stations on the market in the top end have sold this year.
We've seen basically a 180-degree turn on the market.
Cattlemen say it will be a while before producers feel confident in the government and trust is regained with Indonesia. But to get back on their feet financially will take even longer.
Australian wheat farmers are expecting a bumper crop this season. The latest figures point to a harvest of 44 million tonnes for the year. That's the biggest on record. The problem in some areas is the amount of rain they've been getting. Too much this time as opposed to too little. Amy Bainbridge reports from New South Wales's Liverpool Plains.
This is a race against time for Xavier Martin at Malali. After weeks of heavy rain, he's in the header 14 hours a day.
We've harvested a lot at very high moisture, but we've still got quite a bit in the paddock and, it's certainly suffered some downgrading.
Rain has damaged crops in some regions and it's caused harvest delays in many states.
It's a bit of a mixed bag at the moment, and there's no one really who is in a situation where they're really happy with the way harvest has gone.
Rob Davies farms at Blackville on the Liverpool Plains.
It's not as bad as last year, that's for sure, but certainly there's a lot of crop laying down. It's weather damage.
Despite the challenges in some regions, ABARES says Australia is still heading for a record crop. Western Australia's winter crop production is forecast to rise 82% this year. Queensland is also up, but there will be falls in Victoria, New South Wales and South Australia.
The size of the crop in the eastern states is expected to be a little bit smaller than last year. It's still expected to be one of the biggest crops on record in the eastern states.
Farmers here on the Liverpool Plains are working as fast as they can before more rain comes later this week. And like the farmers right across Australia, their main concern now is the price they'll get for their crop.
We're potentially seeing growers lose $80+ per tonne for the wheat that they do harvest.
For Xavier Martin, it's time to play catch-up and hope for a bit of luck.
We'll certainly be getting the machines going long hours and keeping them going, trying to stay out of the mud but maximise what we can get out of the field.
A sentiment echoed by farmers right across the nation.
The New South Wales town of Young is considered the cherry capital of Australia, producing around 30% of the nation's cherries. But in recent years, late rain in the growing season has destroyed much of the crop. Unfortunately, this year, that wet weather is back, and many growers are feeling on edge. Anna Morisseau has the story.
These cherries look ripe for the picking, but for growers in Young, it's been far from a bumper harvest. Wet and humid conditions have eaten into the crop.
It's always a little bit disheartening when you've got some beautiful fruit there. Unfortunately, you sort of walk out there one morning and sort of find that, you've got a percentage of your crop sort of lost.
It's left a sour taste in the mouths of growers, many of whom are already on a knife edge after last year's devastatingly timed rain, which destroyed about 90% of the region's cherries. And the repeat of bad weather this year is not just a hit to growers. The cherry industry is big business for the whole town.
People get down about it when you get a weather event that affects their livelihood, of course, but this is an amazing town for resilience.
The picking season draws in about 3,000 workers when things are travelling well. But this year, there's less work around and, in turn, less business for all.
The last few months have been, I suppose, quiet is probably the best word.
Some growers are reluctant to go on camera to talk about how the season is going. The fear is if they're seen to be talking down the quality of their fruit, it'll give wholesale buyers an excuse to drop the price. And that's a risk they simply can't afford to take. Scott Coupland doesn't yet know how much of his crop has been lost. But as tough as last year was, and as uncertain as this year is, giving up on a tradition stretching back 4 generations is not an option.
I'd like to sort of stay in the industry. The industry has there's a lot of benefits and a lot of pleasure.
And hopefully in the coming years, sweeter results.
South Australia's Barossa Valley could be on the verge of a tourism boom, but has been told it needs to improve local services and intensify its push into lucrative Asian markets. They're the key findings of a new report into how the famous wine region can turn around its shrinking market share. Matthew Smith reports.
The Barossa Valley is a prime destination for Australian wine lovers. While the local market is important, a new federal and state-funded report says the international market is where the valley's renaissance lies, but only if it makes changes.
It's clear from the report that there are a number of gaps and areas that need adding to and strengthening and diversifying in order to deliver perhaps another $100 million plus growth in tourism.
Those gaps include needing more accommodation and appropriate signage, better public transport, even building a wildlife park. Like so much of Australia's economy, building markets in China is a key recommendation.
They love wine. I mean, wine is a huge growth sector in China, and Australian wine is very popular there.
The Chinese market has grown by more than 20% and is expected to hit 1 million visitors within 10 years. One factor the Barossa believes will help tap this rich vein is attracting direct flights from China.
The experience in other parts of the world is the more direct flights, the easier you make it for people to get there. And of course, once they get to Adelaide Airport, It is astonishingly convenient to get to the Barossa.
The federal government says the recommended infrastructure would be built with both public and private money. The report estimates successfully growing Barossa tourism could produce another 700 jobs.
Heading overseas, and New York City is the last place you'd expect to find primary producers. But on the city's rooftops, a growing number of people are keeping beehives. As Miriam Hall discovered, it's all part of a trend for locally grown food.
It's a skyline like no other, and high above the bustling streets is a completely different world. It's the world of urban beekeeping. On this Manhattan rooftop, beekeeper Andrew Cote is tending to his hives. He's taking a late harvest of honey and preparing the bees for the brutal New York winter.
It's hard to say what attracts people to beekeeping. It is magical to have these little creatures and to take on the responsibility of their stewardship and to create together with them this wonderful little world.
People have been keeping bees in New York for decades, but until April last year, having hives in the city was against the law. Now that it's legal, the number of beekeepers has grown exponentially. There are about 250 beekeepers in New York, a figure which is on the rise. And that's got Andrew worried.
You have a lot of cowboy and cowgirl beekeepers who get their bees, put them in a box, and then neglect them.
Beekeeping is more than a hobby for Andrew Cote. He's also interested in making sure people all over the city have access to fresh food.
It's right here in New York City. There are people who cannot walk or cannot even train within a reasonable distance to a grocery store and get fresh fruits and vegetables.
Over the bridge to Brooklyn, and this community farm is addressing that very problem. Here, New Yorkers can grow their own fresh food. And an entirely organic, pesticide-free way of keeping bees is being trialled.
It might be hard to believe, but in this bustling city that is New York, there are enough trees and flowers for bees to seek their nectar.
As a younger apiarist, Tim O'Neill is looking forward to the future of New York beekeeping.
Now, with the advent of legalization and this explosion of people interested in their personal food systems, the community is expanding rapidly to include not just beekeepers, but anybody with an interest in where their food came from.
Such small bees, such a large city with such a big job to do.
And that's all for this edition of The Rural Quarter. I'm Lucy Barber in Shepparton. See you next time.